So welcome to HiNZ 2018, and I'm here talking to Jon Herries. Jon is Group Manager Emerging Health Technology for the Ministry of Health. And Jon, you gave a paper this afternoon entitled, How Do We Ensure Great Health Technology Ideas Get Delivered? So Jon, tell us, how do they get delivered?
That's great, Pat. Thanks for the time. Essentially, there's kind of three things that we've been talking about. The first one is the need for us to think about delivery. So often we think having the great idea is just enough. We don't think in New Zealand about the work that needs to go in to finish and implement that great idea. So we end up with lots of pilots. We take that number 8 wire approach, and so we tend to start a lot of things but not finish a lot of things. So sometimes we need to put our heads down and just get the delivery done. And that might be a waterfall approach or it might be an agile approach. I like the thought that you start with a minimum viable product, and that's not just the wheels on the car, but it might be a scooter. And then you move up from a scooter to a motorbike, and you move from a motorbike to a car, and you move from a car to a truck. And that's kind of your evolution, rather than kind of building each part of the car as you go along and finally end up with a truck. The second thing that's really important is the story that you tell. So in change management, often when leaders talk about change and new ideas, they tend to focus on the organisation. And what we know is that often what you want to focus on are everybody else's stories. So people come to work because it fulfills them. They come to work with the people in their team. They come to work with patients. They come to work, if they're in public health, to help the population. So you have to tell those different stories because people will resonate with those different stories. An example would be research, which has been done into lottery tickets, funnily enough. If you give half of a room a lottery ticket with a randomly chosen number, and then you let everybody else choose the number for their lottery ticket, you have to pay 5 times as much to buy back those chosen lottery tickets as you do for the randomly allocated ones. The point being that people's ability to choose creates that buy-in into the situation. So if they understand the story, they can create their own and they can create buy-in. The last thing, because we've already talked about getting it done and we've talked about how we tell the story, the third thing's about partnerships. So what we need to understand in healthcare is we've got a big public sector, we've got researchers and universities that do a lot of work themselves, and then we've got commercial partners. So the question I've got is, how do we get all of those 3 parties working together effectively? And it's about understanding their values and their drive. So that, to me, are the 3 things we need to do in order to get good ideas delivered. And maybe some great ones.
And maybe some great ones, absolutely. Interesting enough, when we talk about delivery, one of the things I don't think we're as good at is the benefits.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the good ideas, and usually people have a lot of ideas on benefits, I don't think we're as good on following through. Actually, have we achieved the benefits, if cliche benefits realization? What are your views on that?
So often it costs a lot to measure those realised benefits. Digital seems like a great way to reduce the cost of that. If I come back to one of the things that we want to deliver a connection to the consumer. So what we know is that research and follow-up research costs a lot of money to work out the outcomes and therefore the benefits. Digital can change that, because if we can create that direct channel to that consumer, we can send a push notification 6 months after the event to say, look, how are you getting on? Are you still getting the benefit from that hip replacement? 12 months on, it's a push notification, and we can automate those things and we can collect that information in an automatic way. At the moment, it's a phone call or it's a nurse visit. And so you very quickly run out of being able to measure particularly those patient outcomes, which I think are the most important.
Mm-hmm. If we could just go off on that subject, well, your portfolio in terms of emerging technologies.
Yep.
So are there sort of 3, 4 top priorities of emerging technologies that you're looking at, or is there a plethora of them? Tell us about them.
So good question. And as much as that's the interesting thing, I kind of come back to my role being in the centre is not necessarily to deliver all of those projects. It's keeping abreast of them, but how do I help the sector put in place that infrastructure to support those good ideas to be delivered? And that's working to build relationships between those key sector players, the universities, the health providers and commercial organisations to build capacity and capability to take advantage of those ideas, to build a sandpit in which people can play. And so we're working really hard on that in the ministry at the moment. An example being machine learning. So lots of people want to work on machine learning. What we know is that there's risks around governance, there's risks around bias, big issue in machine learning. There's risks around implementation, so taking it from a research project into practice. And then there's kind of an ongoing assurance risk. So what we're working on is some advice for the sector, some guidance about how they can do this more safely and effectively.
So, because we've heard a lot already of this, the machine learning, AI, augmented reality. Does that all fit within the same?
Yeah, it does. So, and think more broadly. So feel free to think about genomics. So the question I have is, when it becomes cheap enough that you can do it in your phone or on your phone, that is a big game changer. We don't know what we're going to do with it at the moment, but we can't afford to sit back and wait until someone patents it overseas. The other thing that you might be surprised to think of as technology are hip replacements. So there's a lot of technology that goes into making a hip replacement, and lots of them are now digitally printed, so 3D printed. There's an interesting question about what else can we be 3D printing, and how do we go through the process of 3D printing? How do we decide what the design of the hip replacement is, and how do we customize that to the individual to create a hip replacement that suits you better than one off the shelf? And how can we do that for cheaper or the same price?
And how are you going about monitoring, researching, gathering information on that?
So our team's kind of split into two parts. We've got a people side, because while we're talking about technology, ostensibly health is really about people. So what we want to do is gather up people that have a real interest in technology and health and bring them into the fold. We've got a Yammer site. But we also want to raise the health technology literacy of people in the sector so that they really want to be engaged. We want to collect these ideas and ways people are trying new things so that others can learn. And that's kind of our people side. We're then providing advice directly on certain technologies, and we're kind of careful to make the difference known between product and technology. So product is a series of technologies, and a technology is often combined with others to make a product. So trying to focus on the technology side rather than the product side, trying to advise large projects on their technology plans. So an example would be the new Dunedin Hospital build. So in 5 years' time and in 10 years' time, what does technology look like? What do they need to be thinking about and be ready for when they open in 10 years' time? Classic example about the genomics. How much of their treatment is going to be genome-based in 10 years' time? At this point, we don't know, but it's interesting to have the conversation about where these things are going. And it's important that when we make investment, that we consider these opportunities as much as we consider the risks.
Okay, another question for you. So how do we achieve a balance between sort of what were newer or disruptive technologies, and you know I have a bias towards telehealth.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes to bed these things in, for it to become business as usual. Yeah. The change management, all of that to take a disruptive technology, make it business is a long lead time. In the meantime, something new has come along. So now it's machine learning, it's AI, it's genomics. And how do we balance that? If you say to get excited about the new stuff, in the meantime, the hard slog of embedding something in a technology into business as usual.
Delivery, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think the interesting thing that I use in the back of my head is kind of the triple aim. So what's best for the patient, what's best for the system, and what's best for the clinician, in order to kind of decide which way we should be going. The last lens you add to that is kind of a value for money thing. So if it turns out that we're pursuing a certain technology which is really expensive but has good benefits, and it gets replaced with a cheap technology that has the same benefits, it feels to me as if we should be ready to shift. We shouldn't be so far down in the hole or so far removed from what the opportunity might be to shift that we can change that path. But we need to understand what we're doing when we do that. So we need to understand what that impact looks like, whether it's relatively better, whether it's more sustainable for the future.
So do we need to become better at sort of migration planning, understanding the future? I mean, the technology companies, certainly the legacy ones from years ago, the IBMs and the others, would make presentations on this is our direction, this is the future, this is where we're going, and they would have not meticulously planned, but sort of you'd have a view, a roadmap of where you're going. Do we need to do a better job of that when it comes to deploying new technologies?
I think you're right. I think we need to also bear in mind that stories element, which I was talking about before, which is sometimes it's really hard for people in the sector to see the reason we're choosing to do something. So something new comes up and it feels right, and it might be, but there might be a reason that we're not pursuing that at the moment. Likewise, there might be a good reason if you think about these different stories why the new opportunity is the key one. So I'd kind of bring it back to that, how do we implement great ideas? There's the delivery bit, but at the same time there's understanding those stories and why we're doing it as much as the doing of it.
And to feed into that roadmap.
Yeah.
Jon, thank you so much. All right, your presentation and slides will be available on the HiNZ website for the delegates and members to see, and I certainly wish you the best of luck with the emerging technology portfolio.
Thanks.
It's exciting.
We'll be back at HiNZ next year.
Absolutely.
Very
Thanks,
good.
Jon.
Thanks.